Who created God? For centuries, that question has been used like a weapon, a final argument, a philosophical trap, a statement meant to end belief entirely. Because it sounds rational. Everything has a cause, everything has an origin, everything comes from something else. So people assume, if God exists, then something must have created him too. And if something created God, then that creator would be greater than God, which means God would not actually be God. Simple, logical, devastating. At least, that is how it appears. But hidden inside that question is an assumption so flawed, it collapses the entire argument before it even begins. Today, you will discover why causation itself cannot explain existence. You will see why time is part of the created system, not the source of it. You will understand why the human mind keeps trying to place God inside reality. And you will realize something terrifying. The real mystery is not who created God. The real mystery is, why does anything exist at all? Part 1. The human mind tries to trap God inside creation. The question sounds intelligent because the human mind naturally thinks inside systems, inside sequence, inside cause and effect. Everything we experience appears dependent. The child comes from parents. A building comes from builders. A painting comes from painters. A thought comes from a thinker. So the brain forms a pattern. Everything must come from something else. And that assumption works inside the universe. But then humanity makes a critical mistake. It takes the rules of the universe and applies them to the source of the universe itself. That is the hidden flaw. Because if God created reality, then God cannot belong to the category of created things. Otherwise, he would not be the source. He would merely be another object inside the system. And this is the first revelation. The question does not challenge God. It reduces him. It shrinks ultimate reality into a created object. But Scripture never describes God as a being inside existence. It describes him as the reason existence exists at all. Part 2. The category error most people never notice. Imagine asking, what color is mathematics? The question sounds grammatical, but it is broken. Because mathematics is not the type of thing that possesses color. Or imagine asking, how much does love weigh? Again, the structure of the question sounds valid, but love does not belong to the category of measurable mass. This is called a category error, applying the wrong properties to the wrong type of reality. And that is exactly what happens with who created God? The question assumes God belongs to the category of created beings. But if God is truly God, he cannot be created. Because a created being depends on something prior, and whatever it depends on would be greater, which means ultimate reality must terminate somewhere. There must be something that does not depend, something uncaused, something foundational. Not because religion demands it, but because reality itself does. Part 3. The problem of infinite regress. Now the deeper philosophical problem appears. If everything requires a creator, then what created the creator? And what created that creator? And what created that one? The chain never ends. This is called infinite regress, an endless sequence without foundation. But here is the problem. An infinite chain explains nothing. Imagine an infinite line of dominoes falling backward forever. No beginning, no first movement, no initiation. Then nothing would ever start, because every movement depends on a previous movement endlessly, which means something profound. Existence itself requires a non-dependent foundation, something that does not begin, something that does not require explanation outside itself. Otherwise, reality never starts at all. And this is why the concept of God exists philosophically, not as mythology, but as necessity. Part 4. Time itself destroys the question. Now the problem becomes even deeper. Causation requires time. Cause before effect. Sequence, order, earlier and later. But modern physics reveals something astonishing. Time itself had a beginning. Space-time is not eternal. According to the standard cosmological model, time emerged, which means before the beginning of time, there was no before, no sequence, no earlier state, no timeline for causation to even function. This changes everything, because asking what happened before time is meaningless. Before requires time to exist, and asking who created God assumes God exists inside temporal sequence, inside causation, inside chronology. But if God created time, then he exists beyond temporal limitation, not earlier than time, outside it, which means God does not wait, does not age, does not move from moment to moment. He sees beginning, middle, and end simultaneously. And once you understand this, the question collapses, because causation only applies to things inside time, not to the source of time itself. The author and the story. Imagine a novel. Inside the story, events unfold sequentially. Morning becomes evening. Characters grow older. Choices create consequences. Everything inside the story experiences time. But the author does not. The author stands outside the narrative structure entirely. He can read chapter 10 before chapter 1, rewrite scenes, enter anywhere in the timeline. Now imagine a character inside the novel asking, who created the author inside the story? The question fails instantly, because the author is not inside the narrative world. The narrative depends on him. He does not depend on it. And this is the relationship between God and reality. Reality exists inside God's created framework. God does not exist inside reality's limitations. The science of necessary realities. Now consider something strange. Not everything real is physical. Mathematics exists, logic exists, information exists. You cannot touch the number 7. You cannot weigh logic. You cannot physically locate truth inside a laboratory. And yet these realities govern existence itself. The universe behaves mathematically. Physics obeys structure. Reality follows intelligibility, which means some realities exist necessarily, independent of matter, independent of biology, independent of human invention. Humans do not create mathematics. We discover it. And this points toward a deeper category of existence, necessary existence, reality that does not derive from something else. And God belongs to that category. Not contingent, necessary. Not dependent, foundational. The psychology of the question. But here is something deeper. Why does humanity keep asking this question? Because the human mind struggles with infinity. We are finite creatures, Everything we experience begins, ends, changes. So the concept of something eternal feels psychologically impossible. The brain attempts to reduce God into familiar categories: bigger human, advanced being, cosmic object. But biblical theology rejects all of those. God is not a larger creature. He is not part of the system. He is the source of the system itself. And this is why Scripture says, "I am," not "I became," not "I was created," not "I evolved." Pure existence, self-sustaining being, the eternal present. The Trinity structure of necessary existence. Now the deeper architecture emerges: source, expression, continuity. Father, Son, Spirit. Across reality, this pattern repeats. In language, thought, word, breath. In intelligence, awareness, expression, memory. In existence, origin, manifestation, sustainment. God is not static isolation. He is living relational existence, self-existing, self-expressing, self-sustaining. Which means God does not require creation to complete himself. Creation is not filling divine loneliness. It is overflow, expression, revelation. This is why the Trinity matters philosophically, because God is not dependent on external relationship for identity. Relationship exists eternally within his own nature. Perfect alignment, perfect continuity, perfect being. Why the universe points beyond itself. The universe appears structured, ordered, mathematical, fine-tuned, governed by laws. This matters because systems do not explain themselves. A simulation cannot explain the programmer. A book cannot explain the author. A law cannot explain the lawgiver. And the deeper science explores reality, the stranger reality becomes. Quantum mechanics reveals information-like behavior. Mathematics governs physical existence. Consciousness remains unexplained. The universe appears less like accidental chaos and more like intelligible structure, which points beyond itself, toward mind, toward source, toward intentionality. The final reversal. Now the final reversal appears. The question, who created God, sounds intelligent until you realize it secretly assumes something impossible. That ultimate reality itself depends on something beyond ultimate reality, which means it would no longer be ultimate. The question destroys itself. Because if God required creation, he would not be God. And once that becomes clear, the direction changes entirely. The real question is no longer, who created God? The real question becomes, why does contingent reality exist at all? Why is there something instead of nothing? Why does order exist? Why does mathematics work? Why does consciousness emerge? Why does reality appear intelligible? And suddenly, God is no longer the difficult explanation. He becomes the necessary one. The foundation under reality. Everything inside the universe changes. Stars collapse, bodies decay, civilizations rise and fall. Energy transforms, time moves forward. Everything contingent depends on something else, which means something non-contingent must exist. Something not becoming, but being. Not temporary, eternal. Not dependent, self-existing. Because without a foundation, nothing else stands. Without ultimate reality, reality itself collapses into absurdity. And this is what humanity calls God. Not a mythological answer to avoid thinking, but the necessary foundation that makes thinking possible at all. So, who created God? For many people, it sounds like the end of belief, but in reality, it reveals the limits of human thinking. Because once you understand what God actually is, the question dissolves. Not because it was defeated emotionally, but because it was built incorrectly from the beginning. And in its place, something far more profound emerges. The realization that reality itself requires something eternal beneath it, something uncaused, something necessary, something beyond time, yet sustaining every moment within it. And perhaps this is why humanity has searched for God across every civilization. Because somewhere deep within consciousness, the mind recognizes a truth it cannot escape. If everything depends, then something eternal must not. And without that eternal foundation, nothing else could exist at all. So who created God? That question is a lie. This is why discernment is imperative. Because if you listen carefully, it appears the question, who created God, is inspired by the same voice that said,
Did God really say?